All right, so we're just going to do a quick big idea on chapter 28 for you guys, okay? Some of the big things that are in this chapter are the Vietnam War, JFK and Johnson's presidencies, the year 1968 where so much happens, different youth movements that are going to go on during this time period, and of course we're going to get into Nixon here. So these are your 5 main ideas you need to be able to explain, get into, and really decipher. Okay, this is going to help you with your test questions. All right, so be sure to get these down in your notes. All right, the first thing we're going to kind of look at is the presidency of JFK and Lyndon Johnson. JFK is going to have something called the New Frontier. You really need to know what's going on there and what that's all about. It's more than just going to the moon and creation of NASA. It's also the Peace Corps, which we still have today. It's increasing minimum wage, unemployment insurance, and increase in defense spending. He's not going to get a whole bunch done, obviously, because he is going to be assassinated in 1963. So remember what he did encounter from a couple chapters ago. Lyndon Johnson's going to pick up where JFK takes off. He's going to really get into the congressional deadlock, get the civil rights packages passed. He's going to have the war on poverty. He's going to really push education and eliminating discrimination there, care for the elderly. So we're going to get Medicare, Medicaid, and dropping the poverty level. The women's movement is also going to have some shifts in here. We're really going to see a lot of the feminine mystique being talked about in this chapter. We're going to add sex or gender into the Civil Rights Act. And remember, Betty Friedan, she's still in this chapter, okay? The women's liberation movement is going to take this a little bit farther. Here's a bunch of different things, but what I really want you to look at is college, right? They're really going to push all-male colleges like Yale and Columbia to open up enrollment to women, okay? And then they're also going to get Title IX passed, which any of you ladies who play sports, that's an awesome thing because it means that now when you go to college, you have a sports team to play for. All right, so Vietnam, a lot of what you need to know. There's so much to know. Some big ones are the Gulf of Tonkin. That's going to be what kind of starts it. Operation Rolling Thunder is going to be kind of the big initial push. Let's just bomb them, get the war over with. You need to know and remember that the public favored the Vietnam War and everything Johnson was doing. Television did portray it, but people were behind it until 1968. 1968 is a pretty watershed moment. It's going to change everything when it comes to Vietnam and whether we support or don't support it. So there's a bunch of youth movements going on during this time. You really need to know the difference between these 3 groups. We're going to have the New Left, all right, which is your Students for Democratic Society. They're going to reject consumer culture. They do not like the foreign policy of containment. All right, they are anti-Vietnam. Then you're going to have the Young Americans for Freedom. They're going to be more conservative, and they're going to be pro-Vietnam. And then you're going to get your counterculture hippies. Okay, so the New Left is actually politically minded. All right, the Young Americans for Freedom are politically minded, and then the counterculture is really into social gatherings and music and extracurricular activities. 1968 is really huge. When it comes to Vietnam, we're going to have the Tet Offensive, which does not look good for the U.S. and the war going on in Vietnam, and this is really going to be a turning point where people do not support it any longer. There's going to be the My Lai Massacre, which is also going to turn people against the Vietnam War. There's going to be political assassinations. Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy running for president. They're going to be assassinated. MLK before he gives a speech, and then Robert Kennedy after he gives a speech for his presidential campaign. All of these things really fuel the protests for the youth groups during this time and everybody who is anti anything that the government's doing. We are going to have Stonewall in this chapter. Don't have time to really go over it a bunch, but you guys do need to know it. It's a huge social movement during this time period. Stonewall in New York, June 1969. Then we're going to get Nixon. I'm running out of time. Détente is his thing. Know it. Peace in Vietnam was big. Okay, except he didn't actually get peace in Vietnam. He bombed them more. Then we have the Warren Court. You need to know